well. Is that
We're looking at the Santry River from Santry down to Raheny and into the sea. Starting at Santry, the main, what remains of it, it used to be a big house with a very controversial family, the Ball family, owning it. Margaret Ball and her grandson became Catholic martyrs. The rest of them were total scumbags, especially Walter. Collier, the famous highwayman, used to hang out there, stick up stagecoaches passing by. Des McAleenan, who played football for Colombia and the United States, I believe, came from that neck of the woods. But when we look at what remains of Santry Demesne now, it's really, at least in the 60s when this was filmed, it was pioneers picking over the ruins of what was left of these big houses that ruled the Pale, the big area in North Dublin that fed much of Ireland and much of the British Empire. So these big houses were built on the back of that and building up the country and the profits that came from that. Those steps are still there today, but really Santry Demesne, where one of the top chaps in the Hellfire Club, Walter Ball, hung out, is really only a shadow of its former self. It's fallen into rack and ruin, and the corporation have built it up for people to walk their dogs around and walk themselves around. And what we're primarily interested in is the pathway which leads from the Santry Demesne down to Coolock and out to Raheny. It goes under the main motorway heading north to the airport and to Belfast. It bypasses the old Santry Airport Belfast Road, and it continues really by a narrow lane, not a very picturesque lane, but a quiet lane with the factories that were set up in the 1950s on one side of the Santry River and the various housing estates that followed them to cater for people working there that were built in the 1960s. There's still a lot of free land there, but unfortunately Dublin Corporation itself admit that there is antisocial tendencies which make it an uglier walk than it might otherwise be. Now, the glass is not entirely half empty, it is half full, because thanks to the corporation and concerned citizens, some places like the Stardust Park that the Santry River flows through is a major success, because an awful lot of hard work went into it, and because of the tragic nature of what it commemorates, most people there, most people in Coolock treat the place with respect and don't vandalise it or anything like that. So when you come down from Santry, it's a flat pedestrian plebeian type of walk until you get to the Stardust Park between Northside Shopping Centre and the Cadbury's factory, and it is a joy to walk through that park. It's actually quieter and I think nicer than the Santry Demesne, which is really just a big park for people to toddle around in. Not my kind of thing, but it's catering to a very large amount of people up there. The Stardust Park, to my mind, is much nicer.
St. Valentine's Day comes around once a year. Our thoughts turn to love as the time it draws near. When sweethearts and darlings, husbands and wives, pledge love and devotion for the rest of their lives. As the day turns to evening, soon night time does fall. Young people get ready for the Valentine's ball. As the night rings with laughter, some families still mourn the 48 children who never came home. Have we forgotten the suffering and pain, the survivors and the victims of the fire in our train? The mothers and fathers forever to mourn the 48 children who never came home. And 'twas down to the Stardust they all made their way. The bouncers looked on as they lined up to pay. The records were spinning, there was dancing as well. Just how the fire started, sure no one can tell. In a matter of seconds, confusion did reign. The room was in darkness, fire exits were chained. The firefighters wept, for they could not hide their sorrow and anger for those left inside. Have we forgotten the suffering and pain, the survivors and the victims of the fire in our train? The mothers and fathers forever to mourn the 48 children who never came home. Throughout the city the bad news had spread. There's a fire in the Stardust with 48 dead. Hundreds of children are injured and maimed, and all just because the fire exits were chained. Our leaders were shocked, grim statements were made. They shed tears by the graves as the bodies were laid. The injured have waited in vain for 4 years. It seems like our leaders shed crocodile tears. Have we forgotten the suffering and pain, the survivors and the victims of the fire in our train? The mothers and fathers forever to mourn the 48 children who never came home. 500,000 was paid in solicitors' fees, a fortune for the owner and his family. It's hard to believe that not one penny came to the working class people who suffered the pain. The days turn to weeks and the weeks turn to years. Our laws favour the rich, or so it appears. A mother still waits for her kids to come home. Injustice breeds anger, that's what's been done. Let us remember the suffering and pain, the survivors and the victims of the fire in our train. The mothers and fathers forever to mourn the 48 children who never came home.
My family's Irish history has always fascinated me. My father, Hubert Carson Morton, grew up in a large house in the small village of Coolock, just outside of Dublin. He lived with his father and mother, his grandmother, 6 sisters and 1 older brother from 1914 till the late 1920s. My father's birth record from 1914 shows his address as Schoolhouse, Coolock. I like to think that that's him standing with 2 of his sisters in this photo from the 1920s. The house was originally part of Beaumont, the almost 1,700-acre estate of Sir Arthur Guinness, who founded the Guinness Brewery in 1759. The old schoolhouse may have dated back to 1726, when it was built for a so-called English school for Protestants only. My grandfather, Joseph George Morton, who worked at the Guinness Brewery, moved his growing family into the big house in Coolock at about the same time that my father was born. He's the little boy on the right. My grandmother, Emily Jane Morton, died in 1933 at the age of 57. This photograph, taken at the time of her funeral, is probably the last time the entire family gathered together. My father emigrated to England in the 1930s, married my mother, and served in the Royal Air Force during World War II. The whole family, including myself at age 11, emigrated to the US in 1959. My grandfather lived to the age of 94. That's my father on the left, and this was the last time they ever saw each other. As for the house, it survived through the decades, where it appears in this 1960s documentary film about Coolock. Sadly, it was demolished in the late 60s or early 70s, and is now the site of the Bank of Ireland building. Such is progress, I suppose.
Coolock House is situated in the grounds of Mercy College on St Brendan's Drive. It is thought that the house was built around 1798. In 1809, a wealthy man named William Callahan bought the house and came to live there with his wife Catherine and a young orphaned woman. The young woman's name was Catherine Macaulay. Catherine had come to live with the Callahans to keep Mrs. Callahan, who was ill at the time, company. They got on very well, and eventually the Callahans adopted Catherine. The Callahans believed that they should help the poor and sick in their area. Catherine assisted them with this work and also taught some of the local children in the Gate Lodge of Coolock House. When Mr. Callahan died, he left the house and land to Catherine, which made her a millionaire by today's standards. Catherine had been upset by the poverty she had seen, and she wanted to set up a centre that would educate and give shelter to poor girls. She sold Coolock House and its land. She built a large training centre and refuge on Bagot Street, which was opened in 1827. In 1831, this became the first convent of mercy for the Sisters of Mercy, the new religious order Catherine had set up. The Sisters of Mercy spread throughout Ireland and the wider world. Today, the order is still involved in education and in helping people in many countries. Catherine Macaulay, who had become the first social worker, was honoured for her achievements by having her picture on the Irish £5 note for many years. The Cadbury factory in Coolock is situated at the junction of Oscar Traynor Road and the old Malahide Road. It was built on the grounds of an old mansion called Moatfield House. Moatfield House had been built by an English architect named James Lever. It was later owned by Michael Staunton, who was Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1847. At that time, one of the best-known visitors to the house was Daniel O'Connell, the famous politician. Moatfield House got its name from a small artificial hill called a mound or moat in the area. The house is not there anymore, but the mound still is. Experts think that the mound was used for burying the dead about 3,000 years ago during the Bronze Age, when people made tools and weapons from bronze. There was another mound near Coolock, and when this was dug up, some skeletons were found underneath. When the Cadbury factory was being built, the builders had to be careful not to get too close to the mound in case they damaged it. The Fry Cadbury factory, as it was then, was opened on the 31st of May 1957 by Minister Sean Lemass, who later became Taoiseach. He was given a golden key and got a tour of the factory to see how the chocolate was made. Cadbury's also released 1,000 balloons with a token on them, and anyone who caught one of the balloons got a free box of their new Irish Roses sweets. The factory cost about €2 million in today's money to build. It was an unusual factory as it had so much green space around it. Because of this, it was called a factory in a garden. Offices, a dining hall and a pitch and pot course were added between 1960 and 1967. Today, the factory still manufactures sweets.
We've spent a bit of time looking at the big houses in Coolock, just a sample of them, including what's now Cadbury's factory and the Catherine Macaulay's house. Catherine Macaulay is now buried in the St. John the Evangelist Church, as are members of the Morton family. Here's Cadbury's again with the mound. Cadbury's were Quakers, so the reason for their golf course and so on was their Quaker ethos, which, like so much else, is gone by the board. Here is St. John the Evangelist Church, which the Guinnesses used, but the corporation now has rubbish dumps outside of it. Tonlegee Road, where it means your backside to the wind, because it was such a wild place then. Here, that tree is St. Brenton's Well, the little tree, and that's why this whole area developed around St. Brenton's Well. There's the tree again, the little tree by the river. That was a huge well up till the 1950s, and the Catholic parish is named St. Brenton's after the well by that tree. The church, the Anglican church, is full of history, and a lot could and should be done with it and the area outside. Remove the rubbish tips and make it a nice walk, prune the trees and make it something like Stardust Park. It wouldn't be all that expensive, and it would enhance the whole area immensely if the corporation could do it. The Santry River then flows on and crosses the Tonlegee Road, that's the old Malahide Road, incidentally. So it was busy for the time back in the day. Coolock was the main village going northwards. I'm standing on Violet Hill, which is better known today as Eden Moor. I'm on the football pitch of St. Monica's GAA, which was founded by Kieran Foley and some others when he was parish priest of Raheny. In front of me is the changing rooms which St. Malachy's soccer team are using. You will notice that there's a lot of green grass around here. There was obviously a lot more when it was known as Violet Hill, when the Santry River was a major agricultural base flowing from Santry down past where the Manor House School is today and into the sea there where the causeway now is. The Santry River, like all the rivers of North Dublin, all the very small rivers, made this a very fertile place. So it has been agricultural land for at least 1,000 years. Behind, way behind me in the trees, you can see St. Joseph's Hospital, which was Eden Moor House, which was where Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator, and some others came when Raheny railway station was founded in the middle of the 19th century. Now that was a really big deal because it was one of the first railway stations on what was then known as the Dublin to Drogheda line. It showed how important Raheny, or Raheny as the old timers call it, was to the agricultural system which existed there. The Santry River still exists. We can walk from Santry to Raheny, which is the part that concerns us. The old houses are gone. The manor house and other great institutions continue, and it's really up to us to make the best of what we have left. The purpose of this short video was to show that there's a resource there, the Santry River Basin, and it should be respected more and utilised more. And I will be making more videos now on the main route of the Merino Camino, which goes through the Malahide Road, past Cadbury's and St. John the Evangelist. But I just thought it very important to show that there are these little detours that we can make, one of the most important and unexplored of which is the Santry River Basin.